I anticipate that there will be grumblings about the process, and also people who will not be happy with the people that end up on our narrowed down list. And that is fine. That is democracy. But I want people to know that we are playing the hand that we were dealt, and we are doing it as fairly and as transparently as we possibly can.
That's Council President Sarah Nelson right there, anticipating the pushback she and the Seattle City Council will get over the selection of a new council member to replace outgoing council member Teresa Mosqueda in citywide position 8. That process is underway this week. We'll talk about the 8 candidates wanting that position and also some of the political moving and shaking behind the scenes there. Plus, another lawsuit now facing the Seattle Police Department and a look at gun control in the state legislature. Plus, a whole lot more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel, and the views expressed here are mine. And I am once again with my co-host, David Croman of the Seattle Times. And David, you have recently moved from the transportation beat back to the City Hall beat you were covering for Crosscut not too long ago. What's it like to be back, my man?
Well, I'm still kind of settling in, so getting my feet back under me and trying to figure out, where to go from here. So, early days yet, but I'm optimistic for how we get going on this.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of stuff to cover here, and I really appreciate your expertise as always, David. Thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our show patrons. A shout out to Rob this week, intern Rob. Thank you for sticking with us for the last 4 years, showing your support. Really appreciate that. If you're not a patron and if you're listening right now, please get on board. For just $5 a month, you can access Patrons First podcast, where I'm talking to local lawmakers and other newsmakers as well. Patrons cannot do this without you. A big thanks also to Converge Media. The video version of the podcast is on Converge. You can watch it Wednesday nights at 7. Okay, let's get started with Right Here, Right Now. Well, I have seen a lot of news outlets title their coverage of filling the council vacancy with the headline, "And then there were 8. There are 8 candidates up for this job: Juan Cotto, Neha Naria, Mark Solomon, Vivian Song, Mari Sugiyama, Stephen Strand, Lynn Tai, and Tanya Wu. And that whole "and then there were 8" brings to mind the Agatha Christie classic "And Then There Were None," where 8 people are invited to a remote island and then start killing each other off. I want to point out, no one has murdered each other just yet. But, David, you did a great story on this in the Times, uncovering this battle between labor and business that's really going on behind the scenes regarding this position. What did you find out?
Yeah, it's interesting. Business had a really good election. Basically, everyone that they were supporting won, with the exception of Tanya Wu, was the only person they were backing who didn't do very well, or who didn't end up winning. And so now they kind of see an opportunity to get her on the council anyway through this vacancy process. And so they are calling on their members in pretty blunt terms to push the city council toward appointing Tanya Wu to this open seat. It's interesting because it seems to set up a bit of a conflict with labor, which is pushing for Vivian Song as school board director. It's kind of a bit of a split that wasn't actually there that much during the campaign itself, because at least, the Seattle Building Trades had backed a lot of the same candidates that the business folks had. But here's this example where, business folks hear that labor is pushing for Vivian Song and are sort of trying to rally their troops and push back. So yeah, it's not a ballot. We don't get a ballot for it. We don't get to vote, but that doesn't mean that, the same kind of money and campaign behind the scenes campaigning isn't happening.
Right. And I know we've been covering this for the past several weeks here, folks, but really this is the only thing to focus on with the council. They don't have any committees going on right now, so very much under the microscope with this whole process here. And I was just thinking about this, David, about the dynamic that this presents for Councilmember Morales. We see this candidate in Tanya Wu, who's really been touted by business leaders here. Morales defeated her in November. Also, Mark Solomon is in the mix, whom Councilmember Morales defeated in 2019. I guess I'm trying to figure out what kind of position this puts Councilmember Morales in as this progressive voice on the council. What do you think?
I mean, it's I don't know if it's intentional or not. It is a bit of a, it would be hard if you were Councilmember Morales to not see this as a bit of a direct attack on you. Again, I don't know if that's true or not. I think probably these other council members just like Tanya Wu. But, she's already going to be a marginalized council member, and appointing her somebody that she beat in an election is sort of sends a signal of how this is going to go. There's been some push, basically grasping at straws, but some push from people on the left saying, hey, Councilmember Mosqueda was the one who vacated the seat. Somebody in Councilmember Mosqueda's mold should be appointed to fill it. It seems pretty clear that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And, I think what that business lobbying shows is, at least the business community, and it appears the rest of the city council is not really feeling in the mood to take their foot off the gas. They see an opportunity here and are going to, I think you have to think that Tanya Wu is the favorite to be appointed here. And it's not like Vivian Song is some uber lefty type either. So,
No.
Whoever fills that seat, I think is likely to solidify the pretty strong majority that's there already.
Yeah, and I'm really interested to see this business and labor split because labor didn't spend as much money in this election here, this past one we had in November, than it did 4 years ago. And business actually lowered the amount that it invested too, but still a lot more than labor in the whole thing. So do you see maybe these different labor backers trying to put some more money into this race, seeing this as something they can try to grab onto, this vacant position?
Yeah, I don't think it's really so much money at this point as it is, advocacy, calling on people on the council.
Right.
I do wonder if there's a bit of regret in some ways on the labor part, because these were all really close races. I mean, it was a clean sweep by business, but the margins in each race, with some exceptions, weren't enormous.
No.
Andrew Lewis in particular, lost by basically 500 votes.
Yeah.
And so when he won the first time, he had enormous labor backing, tons of labor money on his behalf. This time he basically had none. And then even where the labor did spend, they didn't spend that much. I mean, it was tens of thousands rather than hundreds of thousands.
Right.
And, when you're looking at these margins, you wonder, and I wonder if labor is doing some introspection here, that maybe if they had spent more, they would have had greater influence. Hard to say exactly.
Yeah. I know we are talking about a council, though, that clearly is looking to find someone that is like-minded with them. At least 4 votes on there, I would see, in support of this new council member in Tanya Wu, possibly as many as 6 in terms of what some of the backstory that you unfolded there in your article. So I really hope people check that one out. David wrote a good piece on that. And I also wanted to talk about another twist in city government here, David, for the Seattle Police Department. This reported in the Times and the Stranger here. 27-year Seattle Police Department veteran Deanna Nolet has sued the SPD and Chief Adrian Diaz, alleging wage, job, and gender discrimination. Nolet was once assistant chief over criminal investigations, applied for the permanent chief job, which Diaz ended up getting in 2020. Nolet was later demoted by Diaz to captain, which is the rank that she still has. This lawsuit says Diaz has a history of misogyny. There was a mention of a flag football game that Diaz set up as a team-building exercise. Nolet pointed out some women on the force might want not to play flag football with some of their male counterparts. Diaz allegedly said the women could be cheerleaders. David, I bring this up because there's another suit pending at the same time against the SPD from Detective Denise Cookie Bolden, who said in her suit back in November she witnessed and endured decades of racism and gender bias from her supervisors and fellow officers. Big backstory, but I'm really interested to see how the wheels of justice turn on this, and also what this means for recruitment for the SPD, which, as we've reported on this podcast, has been lagging. What do you think about this story?
Yeah, I don't know anything about the veracity of it. I do think it, one thing I have heard is some question marks about the health of leadership and how organized leadership is at the Seattle Police Department. Just, the fact that these lawsuits are happening and among upper level people, Deanna Nolet has held some of the highest rungs of power in the Seattle Police Department, suing the chief. That can only say bad things about how kind of executive leadership is at the Seattle Police Department right now. So, again, whether or not anything comes of the suit or what the level of veracity is, it's hard to imagine that, the water cooler conversations these days are super civil one way or the other.
Right.
So, I think is a turning point for the Seattle Police Department. And I think the fact that the leadership is kind of suing each other is probably not a great sign of of how things are going internally there.
No, I would agree. That's certainly an indication of that. And I just wonder, you talk about water cooler conversations. The city council, these new members coming in, have talked about repairing relationships, as it were, with the Seattle Police Department to try to make sure they're bolstering their numbers in that way. Do you think something like this, again, it's behind the scenes, no one's commenting on it from the police department to the city attorney's office with this pending legal action here, but how does this really impact the chief's dealings with the city council or other city leaders right now? Do you have a feel for that? I know it's a behind the scenes thing, but I have to think there's an impact there too.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that this will raise questions. At the same time, I do think this is just going to be a council that is going to be less interested in kind of airing the Seattle Police Department's dirty laundry too much. Their focus, I mean, they were elected to, in large part, to get their arms around the size of the police department, get their arms around public safety. That if there's such thing as a mandate for this department, for the city council, I would say that's probably it, is public safety. It's sort of plumbing the depths of the inter-office drama or conflict. I would think if the members of the city council would probably prefer not to have to do that.
Sure.
Not to say they won't. I think it's probably worth questioning. At the same time, they're not going to get answers from it because this is a legal thing. Chief Diaz isn't going to say anything publicly that could possibly undermine a lawsuit. So again, though, I do think, I do wonder if in the next few years, because, turning around the police recruitment numbers for all the criticism that the last council got around, comments about defunding the police or whatever, it is a nationwide problem and it's not easy to solve. Even if you are not talking about defunding the police, it's going to be a really challenging thing to do. And I think that's going to put a lot of pressure probably on the leadership at the Seattle Police Department to kind of show their work and how they're performing. And so I think it's going to be an important couple years for Seattle Police Department's leadership. It's going to be, Mayor Harrell, assuming he runs again, will be up for election again. So, I think it's not a great start for what I think is a pretty critical time for Seattle Police Department leadership.
Agreed. And you're right about that whole issue with police recruiting. I was reading an article recently about the work that's been going on in the Bay Area and some of the cities down there offering $50,000, $70,000 in terms of just signing bonuses to get people to join in as police officers, and just shows you the difficulty there is around the country. And I'm talking about cities all over the country, in the middle, on the coast, all over the place that are having trouble getting officers. So yeah, you're right, David. I think there's a bigger story here when it comes to bringing this police department together, but this is something in the background I think we're going to have to keep an eye on. Well, all right, where are we heading next here? Our state legislature off to a fast start in its short session with a new focus on gun safety bills. We're taking aim at a new permitting plan and a whole lot more coming up on Now Hear This. So we're trying to put a focus on the state legislature each week with a look at some of the controversial measures that are in play right now. One of them, gun control. And there's a new push in Olympia to ban firearms in more public places, to require gun buyers to get permits, and also revise that permitting process. Our state had its highest number of mass shootings in at least a decade last year, as reported by Axios. But as always, there are some legal concerns here. There's a bipartisan move with Senate Bill 5985 to make sure all background checks go through the state patrol, not local law enforcement. But the National Rifle Association says the WSP's database check through federal and state systems and the storage of that data may infringe on a person's constitutional rights.
We designed a proposal to put these background checks, instead of the fragmented and often unreliable way that they had been performed previously, all under the Washington State Patrol.
We've maintained over the years that system in itself was illegal and it should not have been in place. And the language in the bill actually expands it to include all firearms are to be recorded by the Department of Licensing and kept, and we think that's a violation of federal law.
That's Senator Drew Hansen, the Democrat from the 23rd District, and Tom Quisak of the NRA speaking right there. And David, I think it's really clear our lawmakers are trying to do everything they can to stop the rising tide of gun violence in our region. Seattle last year notably tied the record for homicides it saw in 1994, according to the Seattle Times. But the research, and I've done a lot of research on this, it seems really unclear on this point. Do increased background checks decrease the amount of violent crime, the number of gun deaths out there? There are so many firearms in our country that are obtained by ways that don't involve a licensed gun dealer. What's your take on this and what the legislature's doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the difficulty is it's a national issue, and you get a patchwork of laws that
From state to state. Yeah.
from state to state, it's pretty easy to cross from one state to the next. Not a lot of checks or or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I think this legislature in particular is going to always probably push the limits. Compared to other states, Washington doesn't have maybe the same level of gun violence. But yeah, I mean, I think that is kind of the quintessential problem: is the guns are out there already, already being passed around. So it's frustrating, maybe because there is no sort of one gun control bill that really like is a silver bullet, so to speak. No pun intended. So I think this legislature's approach has been to sort of patchwork, slowly build up a net of gun bill, gun control legislation. I think it's getting harder and harder for police to track guns for a variety of reasons. The existence of ghost guns or, guns just like poured in from other places in the country or other country, even from Mexico. And so I don't know that any proponent of gun control legislation would say that this is going to solve the problem necessarily. But,
right.
If you're bleeding and things are really bad, the first thing you have to do is stop the bleeding before you address the wound. And so I think these approaches are sort of in some ways to attempt to stop the bleeding.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And you can tack onto this House Bill 1902, which would require people to pass not only a background check, but take a certified safety course before getting a gun. A few bills aiming at the same target here. And again, we got to stop getting into these metaphors here, but they just kind of happen when you write these stories. One Republican proposal on the table, I thought this was interesting, David, offering cash rewards to people who give information about guns used in crimes, up to $5,000 if the information leads to a criminal conviction. And I guess I'm looking at this, David, a lot of different ideas from lawmakers right now. Clearly, anyone of any political stripe wants to stop the mass shootings that we're having in our state, wants to stop them around the country, wants to make sure we're having fewer gun deaths throughout the state.
Right. Yeah. I think that's right. And I think there's some truth to the fact that there is motivation behind a lot of the gun violence. It's not purely the guns. I mean, the guns, I think the guns make killing easier and more efficient in a ruthless way. And I think that's the viewpoint of gun control advocates is, it's hard to change human behavior. It's hard to change human demand for certain things. So the one thing that maybe is a little easier to do is reduce the efficacy of mass killing. That's not to say that human behavior and the motivators behind that gun violence don't also play a role. They're just, of course, it's a perhaps more nebulous and challenging thing to address than the guns themselves.
Yeah, there's so much to this, and I'm looking forward to this discussion at the state legislature again, so we'll keep tabs on that. But David, I also wanted to follow up on a recent story about State Attorney General Bob Ferguson suing to block the Kroger and Albertsons grocery store merger. So this suit was filed earlier this week in King County Superior Court over a $25 billion deal that Ferguson says would harm consumers and raise prices. This in a state where these two chains make up more than half of all grocery sales. This appears to be the first move by a state or federal agency to stop this merger. The state of California has been talking about it. The Federal Trade Commission making noise about this too. The grocery stores, for their part, are saying this is a good business decision. It'll save customers money long term. Ferguson isn't buying this. What's your take on what's happening here, David?
Yeah, antitrust, I think, is well documented, is perhaps not as enforced as some people thought it might be 100 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
That said, winning these lawsuits, I think, is pretty challenging. And I think there's an argument that there's lots of options. There's local chains and there's big box stores, and but I think most people's experience with grocery shopping is they probably have a Kroger or an Albertsons
near them,
close to them, and sometimes it feels like they're the same grocery store already, but in this case, they would literally be the same grocery store. It seems like more often than not, these kind of antitrust lawsuits maybe don't go as far as maybe folks like Bob Ferguson hope so. He has a decent track record, though, in lawsuits, and I don't think he would bring it if he didn't think it had some shot. So, yeah, it's really interesting. It is, it is hard to go to a grocery store that it's not a Kroger or Albertson already.
Yeah.
It feels that way, and to imagine that those would all become the same grocery store, that does feel like a significant reduction in choice. Whether that choice is zero, though, or truly there's no alternative option that makes it a monopoly, I don't know about that.
Yeah, they're talking about another chain coming in that doesn't have any experience with these retail stores, C&W. I'm very interested to see how that part of it plays out if indeed this merger does go through. But there's one other piece to this, David, that I thought was interesting. The grocery chains are saying this move is good for workers' unions. They're basically saying, hey, if you deny this merger, it'll leave more room for non-unionized stores like Walmart, et cetera, to take over. But then you've got the United Food and Commercial Workers Local 3000, which represents these workers locally in Washington State, saying, hey, we want this lawsuit. We don't want this merger to happen. I guess I was looking for your input on this, David. What impact do you see on workers coming out of a decision like this? Let's say the merger goes through or it doesn't go through. And any thought on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting argument. I mean, because these big companies are unionized, and so that. But you don't do these kinds of mergers unless you feel like you can kind of squeeze more profit out of both of them, and usually that means a lot of times that means reducing staff. I'm sure that's what the unions are worried about. Leverage is a little bit down. I think as a union, when there are sort of two separate bargaining units, if one can kind of push the ball forward, then it creates a baseline for the other, and they sort of leapfrog each other, and there's this sense that they're kind of collectively pushing wages and rights higher. When it's one union, maybe you lose some of that leverage a little bit, that you might gain from being like, hey, look at this other union, look at what they negotiated, give that to us, that sort of thing. So when it's just sort of one bargaining team, I could see that would maybe make it a little more difficult for them to get what they wanted to do. That said, if a collective action in twice the number of stores, some kind of strike, would have a much greater impact. So in that sense, you could also see an argument for why this could actually make the union stronger.
Yeah, this is such an interesting issue when you see the union coming out against this, when you see these businesses really pushing for it. A lot of details to keep simmering on here, too. David, thank you for your insight as always. And we need to move on to what's happening next year, another legal battle brewing. What does it mean when the U.S. Supreme Court of the United States says no to hearing a challenge to Washington State's capital gains tax? We're going to dive into this topic on What's Next. So, David, the U.S. Supreme Court recently said it wouldn't hear the case brought to it regarding our state's capital gains tax. This, of course, the tax our legislature passed in 2021, a 7% tax on profits gained from stocks, bonds, other investments, not real estate, over $250,000. This has been a major windfall for the state. $900 million brought in its first year, with the money going towards education and school construction. So this legal challenge is over, but of course, there's still an initiative brewing to overturn the capital gains we'll be looking at this fall potentially. David, I was just thinking about this with the idea that most likely this capital gains initiative is going to make it to the ballot. Do you think the Supreme Court choice will have any bearing on how people vote on capital gains this November? Does this national decision have an impact on how people might vote on this here in our state in November?
No, I wouldn't think so. It's not altogether surprising that they rejected this. I mean, it feels squarely like a state court issue because, capital gains taxes aren't illegal at a federal level or anything like that. I mean, the question has been whether how it interacts with the state constitution. So it doesn't surprise me that the Supreme Court
is it an income tax? Is it not? Et cetera. Yeah.
A lot of legitimate questions that the state that require analyzing the state constitution, not the country's constitution. So it doesn't really surprise me that they didn't want to take a look at this. As far as how it affects people's views, I don't think it does. If I'm a backer of the capital gains tax, I would be a little bit nervous just because taxes tend to not do very well at the initiative level. Almost anytime there's some question around, at least new taxes, they've put the income tax question to voters a couple times and it's failed. I don't know if there's an example of giving voters the option to roll back a tax, how that would be different than the question of whether to add a tax. I think in general, I would say in general, this state is probably in favor of higher taxes on rich people. The question is whether,
right,
as they're reading the ballot measure, that is the impression that they get.
that's exactly where I was going with this, because I really feel this campaign to repeal it is going to say, watch out. The state's trying to take your income because look what they did here to these high earners or whatever else, and it's going to impact you too. I mean, I'm trying to figure out where this whole campaign goes. Is it that kind of fear factor over this is going to be an income tax and watch this slippery slope go, or how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I think that's going to be the campaign. Is it's a creep factor that if this today, then what tomorrow? For Democrats, their strength, of course, is in the Puget Sound region. That's where they get all their votes. That's also where a lot of the capital gains tax money is coming from. Is King County and Pierce County and the East Side. That's a constituency that has been moving increasingly towards Democrats. They used to be sort of a moderate Republican. Since Trump has come into office, they have supported Democrats. I don't know that will necessarily be the same case on a question like this, because I do think that there's still a lot of sort of fiscal conservatism around Puget Sound. I don't expect the initiative to get passing numbers in King or Pierce County, but it could be close enough that, because you have to expect that Eastern Washington, the more conservative parts of the state, are going to vote to repeal this, if for no other reason that it's seen as a priority of Democrats and Governor Jay Inslee. The question is whether the people who are pushing this initiative can kind of rally enough opposition to the capital gains tax among people who might support Democrats, especially since Trump has shown up, but might still have a strain. Maybe once upon a time they voted for Rob McKenna for governor or whatever it might be, and still have a kind of skepticism towards taxation, or themselves have stocks and bonds or stocks that are getting taxed that they don't want to deal with anymore.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, the amount of people that this actually affects in our state. You've seen some of the stats too. It's less than it's a single-digit percents out there. We're talking about 2-3% of the people in this state actually would be impacted by this capital gains tax. But you're right about that appeal. Whenever you put tax on the ballot there, I don't know if a lot of people are voting yes on that. So we'll see where that one pans out as well. But David, it is time to wrap up, my friend. And I saw you posted recently about something I noticed last week too, rolling by T-Mobile Field. Posters for 6 Mariners players from last year that are no longer on the team. They're still up there. You got Tom Murphy, Marco Gonzalez, Robbie Ray, Jerry Kelenic, Gino Suarez, Teoscar Hernandez. Were you looking to peel one of those down and tack it up at your house, or what was your thought there?
Yeah, my thought was it's a nice metaphor for, the fact that they haven't gotten around to putting up taking down those posters. It's just, you can read maybe too much into this organization, but at this point I would think, look, you've already dumped them. Maybe you should take the steps to take down their paraphernalia.
Yeah, I know. Well, pitchers and catchers in less than a month, man. I can't wait. We'll see what spring training has in order. That always gets me optimistic. But a bit of a sad commentary on the post ring on the side of T-Mobile Field. Well, David, thank you as always for joining me. Thanks to everyone listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Please find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon as well to show your support. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. We will see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2024.